Hello, fellow travelers, and welcome to the Traversing the Stars podcast. How are my loyal listeners? Thank you for your continued support. As always, smash that subscribe button, everybody. We have an amazing show for you all because boarding the mothership is Liam Sharp. You know him as the legendary artist of the Green Lantern and Batman Reptilian. He is now the creator, writer, and artist of Starhenge, coming from Image Comic Books. Now come join me as we go traversing the stars. Hello, Mr. Sharp. Thank you so much for coming to the Traversing the Stars podcast. I'm a big fan of yours, and it's glad to have you back on the show.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome, Jeff. Thanks for having me.
Oh, the pleasure's all mine. Like I said, you're by far one of my favorite artists ever. Your work on Green Lantern with Grant Morrison was phenomenal, and probably some of the best work on Green Lantern.
Thank you. That's high praise. I stand in the footsteps of giants. So if you.
Or you're the giant, and they're standing on you in your footsteps. So, first question. So, what inspired you to create your creator-owned comic, and why was now the time to return to creator-owned work?
Well, I think there's a whole bunch of reasons for it, really. Partly is timing. I've had this stuff up my sleeve for a long time, and I'm a writer as well, as you know, and I've got a few novels out there, and I don't get as many opportunities to write as I would really like. So there was that. There was also just the fact that I had a bunch of, with freelance life, you've always got pitches in with companies, and I had a bunch of pitches in with DC, and usually one of them lands, so you sort of stay in fairly constant work. And this time, as I came to the end of the work I was doing on Batcat and Batman Reptilian and everything, I've been waiting for a couple of things to potentially materialize, and sadly, or fortuitously, none of them did. So I suddenly had this window with time to kill, and the question then was like, okay, I'd run the Kickstarter as well, so I had a little bit of basically a fund to keep me going, enough just to keep me ticking along month to month, and then a window to do it. So I just thought, well, when is there a better time to do this? So I just sort of grabbed the bull by both horns, really. And also think, off the back of a 6-year run, pretty much unbroken, really, for the last, since Wonder Woman through Brave and the Bold, Green Lantern, Batman, it hasn't let up. I haven't stopped. So that seemed like, if I was ever going to have a good time to do it, then now was it. So,
the cool thing about the project, the project's called Starhenge that we're going to be focusing on today, obviously. And I think the cool thing about Starhenge, or one of the cool things about Starhenge, is that you are clearly so passionate about it. I remember you dropping hints on social media about this. God, is it almost 7 months ago or 8 months ago that you started dropping the first hints about this upcoming project? Your passion for it is obvious. I mean, that's a long time. You can tell as the buildup and your excitement as you're dropping hints and notes and your first artwork you posted and everything like that. You definitely are 100% in love with this project. And I think that's fantastic. And like I said, yeah, and like I said, Starhenge. So, what inspired Starhenge to get made, and when did you know the idea was ready to be turned into a realized comic?
So many things. I mean, I've always loved science fiction and fantasy, and I've always loved mythology. I've been a little bit of an armchair anthropologist sort of all my life, really. I used to be obsessed with sort of documentaries about the Greeks and the Romans or anything like that, the Vikings. And I've read a lot of books on that kind of stuff, particularly mythology. My father-in-law was a big, he was Irish and loved the Irish mythology. So he and I used to talk a lot about that sort of side of the Tuatha De Danann and all of the Celtic mythology, Canunas and those things. So and I had Jim Fitzpatrick's The Silver Arm book, and all his work is amazing. And that obviously, I think we talked before about the brave and the bold and the influence that had on that material. But I've never done anything with Arthur, and that's and Merlin even more particularly. You know, that material is very, very deeply rooted in the UK tradition, the British tradition. And I realized that I knew much more about the Greeks and the Romans than I did about, you know, British mythology, which is crazy. So I came across, I guess, when I was about 15, 16, a book called The Quest for Merlin by Nikolai Tolstoy, who's Leo Tolstoy's grandson. And it was a really fascinating book whereby Tolstoy was trying to pin down Merlin as a historic figure, and really try and find out whether that was, you know, feasible, or whether it was whether he wasn't, whether it could be argued in any sort of way. And in the process of reading that book, I discovered, you know, earlier sources like Geoffrey of Monmouth in particular. Probably, you know, Monmouth's interesting because he's referring to basically doing a translation of an even earlier work that has been lost to time. But it's a really fascinating piece of work he did called The History of the Kings of Britain. And a chunk of it, he also did Merlin's Prophecies, which is a separate work. And a chunk of it is the Merlin story with Arthur and all of that. And it's really, really quite, well, it's got crossovers, so you can see how it sort of feeds into later work like Mallory's Mort d'Arthur and stuff. But it's also significantly different, and it's rooted in this sort of, it sort of ties to a much more sort of classical, older past. So there's a bit of it that I loved. Like, okay, so in the Aeneid, for instance, the epic poem that was written by Virgil about Aeneas founding Rome. It was really a propaganda piece to tie the Roman the Caesars to the gods. You know, in Geoffrey of Monmouth, we get this bit where Aeneas's son Brutus then comes to England and founds the lineage of great, you know, English kings. So the idea is suggested that, you know, English kings are related to Roman kings, which are related to the gods, even though it's a Christian time. It was written by you know, Geoffrey of Monmouth was a monk. So it's sort of really fascinating stuff. And for a long time, I was like, I want to do something like that really tells 5th century, as realistic as you can, sort of story about Merlin and Arthur and all of that. And I sort of had this in my head for a long time. And then when I came to do it, and you actually sort of try and break it all down, it's so convoluted and so sort of spread out and covers so many generations. It would have been a very, very particular work. It wouldn't have been the most accessible work for sure, and not that much fun, really. I hate to say it. I mean, it's amazing, but how you keep it sort of rocking along, because people people come into the story, and, you know, 2 pages later they're dead, and you're like, oh my god, this is moving so fast. So it was really down to my wife and Nick Abadzis, who you may know from Leica, who's the Eisner-winning book about the first dog that went to space. Beautiful book. And they basically said, well, look, you're a creator and a writer in your own right. Why don't you tell your own story? You know, you don't have to pay. You don't have to be paying complete homage and a tribute to the work that's gone before. Just tell your own story, and that sort of freed me quite a bit. And that's where Amber came in. Oh, and T.H. White, he was the guy that he wrote the Once a Future King, and his Merlin was born in the future and dies in the past. And I sort of love that idea. So it's a case of like, okay, if he's from the future, what is he coming to the past to do? And that was really fascinating to me. So that was the kind of jump off point.
Well, I mean, I read a cool article that said that basically this idea that you're talking about, Starhenge, has been an idea you've been working on for 30 years. Yeah, I mean, that's an incredible amount of time. I mean, your idea has gone past high school, college, and has been able to become a full-grown adult at 30 years old. So what was it about the idea or concept that you was able to maintain your faith that this was going to be a workable project, even when you said other companies were not wanting it at the time?
Yeah, well, I mean, actually, it was more like 40 years or even longer, because it came from that early love for that material. It just didn't go away. Every time, it's like, I suppose as well, what happened when I was younger, when I was starting out, there was books like Slania or Slane, depending on how you pronounce it, in 2000 AD, which to some extent were taking that kind of material and making, a new and modern interpretation of it. And I felt for a while that was like anything I might do might be considered like a little bit too close to that. So that wasn't the right time then. Later on, I pitched it, in the late 90s, I pitched it around a bit. It didn't gain any traction then. I think there was a feeling there was too much Arthurian stuff at the time. And I think, I pitched it again, and then there was a failed movie, and that. So it's like, it's all about timing. And then I think the other aspect that happened was, I mean, so some of it is, I mean, it sounds stupid, but it's just confidence, confidence in yourself and believing in yourself. Like, it's a very funny thing to be a grown person and to be saying, and it's a little hangover, I guess, from my nerdy youth, whereby, there was once upon a time when I did not particularly like to admit that I loved progressive rock, and I read loads of comics, and and I would, on the surface, I would be dressing in a sort of very trendy way for the 80s, trying to be cool, but in reality, I was a complete and utter nerd, with a passion for mythology and reading comics and listening to progressive rock and all of these kinds of things. So there's this little bit of me that even now I have to sort of kick myself and go, no, it's all right to say, yeah, it's a future Merlin coming into the past to kill, and there's killer robots wiping out magic, as a grown-up, it's like, can I say things like that? Yes, of course I can. I've been doing comics for 35 years, It's everything I do is ridiculous and preposterous, and that's quite wonderful and marvelous, So some of it is like believing in the idea, believing that someone else is going to like it. Some of it is just having the sort of nerve to say it and believing that people will buy it, because it is an out there idea. It's I'm not, like we talked before, I am a writer. I have got novels out. I have written comic series before, but I'm not really known at it for that, particularly in the industry. I've not had as many opportunities as I'd like on that front, and so it's a tough sell. It's a painted comic. It's science fiction. It's fantasy. There's no superheroes. It's just one creator, and yet people seem to have embraced it. So I'm slightly shell shocked and stunned and very, very happy. But I would be lying if there wasn't a moment when I, put the whole thing out there where I was like, oh my God, am I being really stupid putting this into the world, And thank God people have gone, no.
So
We're with you. We're with you.
I mean,
Please. More.
because at least I remember social media posts, and I remember the debate over the title. I can't remember who was it Eric Larson who was debating the title with you at the time. So where did the title come from, and when did you decide I'm going with this is my title?
I think by the time I put it up there and said Starhenge, even though people were questioning it, a few people didn't like it. I kind of by that point was pretty sure that it was right. Nothing else had come up. I'd spent so long trying to find it. For a while it was called The Dragon and the Boar, which is fine, but it's like, what does that tell you? It's not. It doesn't tell you about the bigger scale of it. So I wanted something that really sort of told you that it's part science fiction and part fantasy. Stonehenge is a big part of it. Merlin is extremely tied to Stonehenge. There's no sort of you can't separate that character from Stonehenge. He's meant to have built it in the Geoffrey of Monmouth version. So there's many reasons for Stonehenge to be part of it, and Stonehenge is interesting too because it's like the first time I went to Stonehenge, I was a little bit disappointed. Because I think I expected it to be, out and on the moors, this like magnificent, lonely structure, that you could really be alone with, which is a ridiculous notion. How could there possibly be a monument like that in a small island like Britain, where a monument of such significance would literally be this lonely thing out on the moors? Completely ridiculous. And when you get to it, and there's paths everywhere and ropes and like a little gift shop and an exhibition, and they know pretty much exactly where it's come from and where all the stones have come from, and if they've got a good idea what it was for, and there's a great big road going either side of it, you kind of go, oh, hang on, where's all the magic? I was hoping to kind of bump into the spirit of Merlin here, or something. I was hoping to feel some sort of weird magical thing in my youth, and sadly didn't. And so it has this fascinating place in sort of British folklore, really. Where, like I say, Merlin was meant to build it. It's got a huge amount of weight and portent about it, and yet it's also a laughing stock. As we got like in Spinal Tap and all of those wonderful parodies. So it's sort of globally known. So that was another reason. I obviously, I can't go too long without somebody referencing Spinal Tap every time they see the Starhenge stuff. And that's fine, because at least people have a sense of what it is. It's not completely, alien to them. And then I also just had this strong vision a long time ago of this idea of a giant magical / technological henge being built on Mars, on the red planet, kind of like a Stargate. And so with that image in mind, it was like, well, it's just a no-brainer. Starhenge it is. I don't know what else to call it. It ticked all the boxes, and the more I see it, the more I like it. Me and my wife designed the logo together, and it was funny because lots of people had tons to say about the logos that I was doing initially. I'm not a big designer of logos, so it takes me a bit of a while to come up with anything. But I really thought hard and long about that, and I had some that looked a bit like a Star Trek logo, and they're a little bit shiny and a little bit. They used to call the old Apple logos liquid. It's a little bit plasticky, and I think it had that sort of vibe to it, a bit cheesy if anything. And then we came up with a new one, and I put that out there, and nobody said anything. it just sort of landed. You know, I never saw a single criticism of that new logo. Now I'm saying it, somebody will, but you know, it was like people just went, "Oh, that's it." You know, as soon as it was associated, it had an image associated with it. It holds together. It's really, I'm really proud of that logo that we designed. Um, once I got the first cover with that on it, and it was out in the world, it was like, okay, this is a thing now. You know, it feels real.
I'm sure.
That's
I mean,
exciting.
like I said, when, as I mentioned earlier, you announced the launch of this book 8, 9, almost 10 months prior to when we're talking now in June. When you announced the title and you kind of started talking about it, did the pressure start building up that now you can't back out? You know, now that you can't be like, there's a problem here.
So one thing I've found in my whole life, that the best way for me to do anything is to make it impossible for me not to do
it. That's awesome.
And that's true about anything, you know. So because, you know, I believe it or not, I do struggle with things like a bit of social anxiety. You know, I was a super shy kid, so it's easy to stay in your room and not do things and dream of things and never get them done. The great thing I think about social media is that once you make a statement and say you're doing it, you kind of got to do it. Otherwise, you're not true to your words. You know?
Right.
And I'm also kind of proud. So in that, like, if I say I'm going to do something, I kind of have to do it. I'm too stubborn and slightly too proud to not see something through. So yeah, I just I put myself in a situation where I had no choice.
So was it more to get the buildup, or was it really like sort of like Batman? You decided the only way to get, you know, figure out if I can jump from building to building, you have to force yourself once you jump to say, too late now, can't go back. This is happening.
Just to a large extent, yeah. I mean, and also, I didn't know who was going to do it. You know, it was. It didn't seem. When I said no one was interested, no one had been interested over years before. You know, what I sort of really didn't take into account, which I probably should have done, and this is me being me. God, anyone who knows me knows that I still forget sometimes that I'm actually, you know, quite successful in this industry, and I'm doing all right. Well, in this industry, and I'm doing all right, right? A viable, I'm a viable option for a publisher. I it's no false humility. I'm just an idiot like that. An idiot like that. So it was a case of like, I just thought, well, who's going to be interested? So there was a little bit of like, if I build it, they will come. You know, if a publisher's interested and I announce it and I say I'm going to do this thing, like, maybe I'll hear. You know, maybe I'll hear something. But in the end, I went straight to Image. I went straight to Eric, and it was such a sweet call. I was so nervous. It was all lined up for me to speak to Eric Stevenson, and I thought, okay, I've got to get my pitch right. It's going to be six issues, book one. It's going to be Merlin, all of this stuff. And I got on the call. And I was like, oh, you might say no, and this and the other. Anyway, I sort of ran through the whole pitch, and he said, "Great, what do I have to do to make this happen?" And I was like, "What?" that was it, you know. I'm not having to jump through any hoops. So saying that, I'd love to work with you. This is great. Very much keen to have you as part of the Image family, and I was just sort of, you know, I came off that call just like completely jumping up and down and very, very excited, very happy. But also, you know, it definitely was real at that point. It's like, okay,
well, I think the best part of that whole story is that you, as I mentioned earlier, you were the artist on Green Lantern with Grant Morrison, which was a huge profile comic book, so tons of copies. And you're like, I don't know if people will want to work with you. It's like the fact you're that humble after the amount of work you've done that has been so well received. You worked with such high caliber people as well. You think I would assume you already knew you were a superstar because you are. I mean, especially as an artist, you are a legendary artist at this point. You've made it to that, I think, to that level.
Well, it's very kind of you to say. You know, we're all blind to ourselves. You know, it's very hard to quantify your own value, and I don't think it's necessarily safe to either. I think if you start drinking your own Kool-Aid, it's the beginning of the end. Um, for me, the one of the things that fuels me is, you know, a sort of need to keep reaching and a need to keep improving and getting better. And you know, and I think if I ever thought that I was brilliant, I would stop improving. You know, all I do is see what's wrong, and I want to make it right and make it better and make it, you know, even better and push myself further and further. You know, I still feel like a kid. It's just starting out. You know, I still feel like this, for all that this medium is as old as the cave walls that we used to paint the first comics on. You know, it still feels super fresh and full of promise, and like exciting to me. It doesn't feel like a static medium. It doesn't feel like a fully proven medium. I feel like, you know, it's still got so much space to grow and to just to sort of, you know, continue to reach and be like an amazing progressive medium. So yeah, I mean that's the main thing. I'd hate to you know, wake up one day and just think, my God, I'm brilliant.
That's funny. So would you say that Starhenge is closest to, as far as Arthurian myths go, to Thomas Mallory's Marty the Author? Would that be the one that you said is the most closest to the influence of on Starhenge?
That's a tough one. To an extent, yes, because there's a little bit of the Merlin I'm presenting. There's bits of Mallory and bits of that material in there, Monmouth, and certainly with. I mean, I was just refreshing myself on it a couple of days ago on the last two scripts. So I was writing the scripts for 5 and 6 back to back, and I had a sort of overview of what I wanted to do. But this is where Arthur appears for you know, a couple of issues. He's not a huge part of the story, certainly, but he's in it. It's all part of the setup. And so I was going through sort of like trying to decide which aspect of Arthur I wanted to present, and I definitely didn't want to present the Thomas Mallory version because that's the one everyone knows, and that's, you know, it's the quest for the Grail, and it's all the chivalric tradition, all of that kind of stuff. The version I'm looking at is a 5th century one. He's more like a conquering hero. He's more of an Alexander the Great type character, really surprisingly. You know, I don't want to sort of give too much away, but there's things that Arthur does in the Geoffrey of Monmouth book that you never see anywhere else. And I definitely wanted to allude to that. So yeah, there's going to be like a little bit of that, some of the scales, some of the conquering king stuff. But generally, I think while that was my jump off point, it's very much my book, you know, and it became less about Merlin and less about Arthur and much more about Amber in the end, and Daryl too.
So you have Merlin, you have Arthur from the Arthurian legends. How about some of the other famous characters, Gawain, Percival, Lancelot? And if they exist, are we talking also Morgan Le Fay? Is it Galahad as well? Or I can't remember the one that is the son of Arthur, who kind of turns. I can't remember his name.
Yeah, not really. There are the version I'm doing isn't really leaning into those aspects. There was a treatment I did. Um, I pitched a version of it to DC, um, which did have all of those versions way off into the future, but that one didn't go anywhere in the end. So and again, the more I thought about it afterwards, the more I thought, do I really want to be rehashing all that material again, or do I want to come up with something a little bit more fresh? Um, so it isn't really about those guys, and it isn't really about those stories. It, as I say, it's the setup. They're important for the setup. They're important for establishing the universe and the sandpit that we're playing in. That's not to say that if it becomes like an ongoing thing, which I'd love for that to happen, and certainly it seems like we have enough orders that I'm going to be able to come back and do book 2, which I'm absolutely sort of chuffed to bits about. Uh, I'd love for this to be a sort of recurring series over many, many, many sort of years to come, and all of these aspects can be looked at some point, but not for this.
Okay,
First
so
set
the
of
plot
books,
from
no.
of the sort of from what I've read is written described as a future Merlin travels to 5th century Britain, prevent monstrous time traveling killer robots from robbing the universe of magic. So, how far into the future does this Merlin actually exist?
Well, there's a bit in issue 1, where Amber's talking about 2021. No, sorry, 2112 is a little Rush reference, showing my roots there. So yeah, it's beyond 2112. That's the date that the bestest distinction lands on the planet that's got the dormant AI and wakes it up. And the bestest distinction is obviously a Thomas Bester reference. Stars My Destination. There's a whole bunch of like cultural references embedded in the story all the way through, really, which is a good fun bit of the writing. It's nice to be able to acknowledge my influences over the years. So yeah, it's a fair way in the future, definitely. We're talking really hard sci-fi future. This is space, this is planetary, this is big. This is these are battles that are happening across worlds, and very much between. I mean, it's a current idea. Obviously, there's nothing new about this idea of AI being an existential threat. It's a galactic threat. So I guess there's things like Ian M. Banks's interpretations of the future in his cluster series books, where he talks about how the organic world is sort of separated from the artificial intelligent worlds, and that the different kind of sentience and the different levels of all of that. I guess mine's at a slightly earlier stage than his would have been, where there's still sort of battle going on between these two great and very different intelligences. Whether there can ever be peace between them is yet to be seen.
So, in this far off future, how does science and magic coexist in the future? And does magic exist? Is it like just the remnants of magic, or is magic still fully formed and common? Maybe the best word in this future.
Yeah, that's kind of the fun idea of it. The conceit is that there was magic in the future and it's being wiped out. Only the Queen has got the ability to be able to see it, the Queen. and she's managed to sort of create an out of time capsule to herself that was on a time device that wakes up and tells her that the future universe had magic, and there were the Knights of the Belt that were fighting these AI machines, and keeping a balance and at least heading them off, and that those knights had vanished, not just from the future, as in like they physically vanished from the future. They vanished from time. They no longer existed. No one had a memory of them. So the question was like, what's happened to them? What else have we lost? What do we do about it? So the idea, again, talking about the balance, I just love the idea that science fiction and fantasy, you've got a future science fiction universe that hasn't really got magic in it, and you've got this sort of 5th century universe which is more magical than we thought it was. And there's a kind of, I'm having fun with that. It's like the whole like time thing of like what is real, what isn't real, what happened, what didn't happen. The story Merlin relates to Amber that she tells us about the how Stonehenge was built, is largely built based on the Geoffrey of Monmouth version, but with a science fiction fantasy slant. And she kind of goes, well, obviously that's bollocks. That's not how Stonehenge was built at all. But he was there, I wasn't. Who am I to argue? And maybe nothing is as clear as we think it is, and everything is shifting all the time. And in a world where there is real magic, maybe it was built like that. And maybe in another time it was built in a very practical sense, with being dragged from a quarry in Wales, or there's many different ways, and I guess the fun is like all of it's shifting. It's not like alternate realities. Everything is like a soup, and it's constantly like being slightly tugged at and shifted and changed and remodeled and represented, and we are somehow, as conscious entities, sort of caught up in the sea of that soup, drifting through it all, and being sort of like affected by the ebbs and flows of that, but still maintain some sort of sense of conscious entities.
So you mentioned I think it sounds
that's
awesome. I mean,
take.
because you mentioned a few times Amber Weaver. Who is she in the story? And is she connected at all to the mythology, or is she an additional part that is now interacting with the mythology?
She's an additional part that's interacting with it, but she is the heart of the story. Initially, it was going to be told by Merlin, but it was too ponderous. It got very hard sci-fi. When I was writing it, it became almost like I was doing a Foundation parody, trying my damnedest to write like Asimov in a very sort of cold, hard sci-fi way, and explain it in those kinds of terms. And it's like, this isn't quite right, because how's that going to work with the fantasy stuff? So then it was like, for a while, it was Taliesin telling the stories, the famous Welsh bard, who's often crosses over with Merlin in various stories. And he wouldn't have had an understanding of the deep future stuff. So his trying to make him interpret deep future was nearly impossible. So then I was like, okay, I need something in the middle that is represents us. That's part audience, part us being on the journey, and also I hoped that to sort of give it a little bit more relevance, because I'm a guy, I'm approaching mid-50s, and I don't know how relevant I am, but I have quite relevant kids, and I love going back a little bit to what I was saying earlier about how when I was young, I didn't feel like I could talk about the things that I loved, except with a very select, nerdy circle of friends that, you know. But for the most part, there was this kind of, it's hard to imagine now, but certainly in the 80s, art schools frowned on this kind of material. Almost everybody who considered themselves cool or popular culture wanted nothing to do with, you know, comics or fantasy or science fiction or anything like that. And you know, and obviously that did start changing in the 80s and has changed consistently over the years. Now my kids have no shame at all admitting that they absolutely love DLO or will listen to Yes or put it on a playlist, you know. Will love Doctor Who. There's absolutely, it's like, it's cool to like Doctor Who. Everybody loves Doctor Who. Nobody liked Doctor Who when I was young, you know. It was this cheap little TV show for nerds that was that but again, you know, it's like a lot of the filmmakers today grew up on comics, right? So a lot of the people of my generation who are now doing amazing things in media actually were the people who loved comics and were the people who listened to that kind of stuff and did like Doctor Who, did like cleverly written science fiction material, and have brought that with them into this time, you know. And I love that the kids are just have this wonderful eclectic set of things. They can be fully into, you know, TikTok and how to put on beautiful makeup. You know, all the cool stuff. Watching ridiculous stuff like the Kardashians on one hand, but loving Doctor Who on the other. You know? Listening to Kanye on one hand, but then putting Yes on a playlist. It's that kind of thing. It's like it can be anything, and I love that we're in a sort of age where you don't have to be defined by, you know, either being a rocker or a mod or a punk you can be all of those things or none of them.
So we're talking about Merlin. It goes back in time, and he's going to come back, killer robots. Now, back in the past, the 5th century, do the robots, when they go back to the 5th century, do they look like robots or do they looking like humans? How does this work out?
I came up with this kind of grim idea that when the humans land on the dead planet where the AI has wiped out all the organic life on that world, they arrive in a capsule, a spaceship of some kind, and they land. And the AI, when it wakes up and realizes there's more organic people there on this planet, and they're not happy about it. The view is that it sees humans as wearing the skin of themselves, of AI, because they're arriving in machinery. So it's like they are, you know, wearing the skin of their enemy. And it's kind of an affront to the AI that they would be doing this. And so when it wakes up again and it gets the first astronauts and it treats them really rather nastily, that those mechanical intelligences start wearing the faces of their victims. So they're wearing sort of basically skin masks of humans, and they start to kind of they realize in their interrogations of the astronauts that really what humans fear more than anything else is themselves, and so they create a sort of nightmarish version of humanity, and they mimic the body shapes and wear these human masks. They're not trying to hide, they're trying to terrify us. So you have this really quite disturbing notion of these human-shaped, roughly human-shaped sort of robot AI characters, you know, in a perpetual battle with humankind.
That sounds absolutely awesome. Like I said, I'm really looking forward to getting the first issue. And if I remember correctly, the first issue is 60 pages long. Is that correct? 30 pages. Okay.
It's 30 pages. Yeah. So I wanted it to be a substantial introduction. So it's 30 pages of story in the first issue, and then regular 22 pages after that. It's something actually that Grant and I did in the Green Lantern. So each season started with a 30-page size sort of season opener. So I like that idea, and in many ways I see these books as being seasons too. That idea that I'll come back for book 2, book 3, book 4, and we'll just see.
Like I said, it just sounds terrific. I really do like the idea of the concept of Arthurian legend. I love mythology, and I do love the sci-fi connection. It really sounds like a beautiful pairing of two genres being pushed together. I think that sounds fantastic. And like I said, I know your artwork, so I guarantee this book is going to look terrific visually. So you got me really excited, sir.
Thanks. Well, it's good to know. I'm thrilled that it's coming out. I'm still absolutely loving working on it, and it's funny. It's been so long coming. I keep pinching myself, and I'm just glad that so many people have supported it and have come out of the woodwork and pre-ordered it and back to me, and been really supportive and on the various platforms like Twitter and Facebook and all those other places. And it's great interacting with everybody in there, and it feels like I've been on this journey sort of together with all the people who've supported me through this over the last year or so. And it's just crazy exciting.
So when can the first issue be purchased?
First issue will be on the shelves on July the 6th, which is again really exciting. I'm going to be doing a signing here in the Bay Area in Concord at Flying Colours, Joe Field's Flying Colours shop, and then I'm flying back to England that night actually. So I'm going back to Derby because I'm getting an honorary doctorate from Derby University. So I'm going to be Dr. next time.
That is so. Congratulations! You totally deserve it.
Crazy.
So, and you do at some point need to come by the Northeast, Trificon, Rhode Island Comic Con, something. Come by. I need to get my autograph from you at a table. So come by Connecticut. Come by Rhode Island. they used.
Okay, mate. I had a great time at Trificon.
Yeah, I knew you were there, and somehow I missed you. I could not find you. So when I went there, the last time I was there, I was actually walking up and down the aisles looking for you, and I couldn't. And I think you either were gone, maybe for some reason, but I did not find you.
I have no idea.
Yeah, so why. It's totally my. Oh, your camera just clicked off.
Yeah,
there you are. I'll edit that small bit, but anyways, but either way, I do hope you come back because, like I said, I'm looking forward to seeing you at one of these conventions. So thank you, Mr. Sharp, so much. I look forward to seeing Starhenge and buying my copy. Thank you so much.
Huge. Cheers. Take care. Definitely. Cheers, Jeff.